Snacking. What's the problem with snacking? Everybody snacks.
So this is in the 1970s. The food industry decided, we need to come up with this new category of eating. And it's eating between meals, snacking. Now, if people are eating 3 square meals, they may not be super full. So they kind of need just these little meals they can have, and they need to be easy to eat. They need to be quick to eat. So they come up with snack foods. And what's really interesting is that, I told you about the scarcity loop. There is a executive in the food industry who's talking about what makes a snack food successful. Like, how do you sell a snack food? And he said it has to have 3 V's. It's got to have value, it's got to have variety, and it's got to have velocity. That's just another way of talking about that loop. So, right, it's a good value. Variety, it's got to have a lot of different interesting, intense flavors, and there's got to be a lot of different options. So when you think about chips or crisps, as you guys call them crisps, right? Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of different flavors. There's like barbecue, there's sour cream, there's salsa, there's like all these different flavors. And then velocity, it has to be quick to eat. So when you ultra process a food, as I mentioned before, people tend to eat it faster. And so the industry really leans into this. They create snacking as this totally new category. And this is in the 70s is when you really start to see obesity climb. And it's because we just end up eating more across the day. Meantime, our activity levels are dropping.
There's a kind of a through line there with gambling when you talked about velocity, the speed in which you get the outcome being short.
The faster we can do a behavior, the more likely we are to repeat the behavior, especially if it's unpredictable. So one of the big advances in casino technology, for example, with slot machines, was removing the handles. Because, if the machine has a handle, you have to do. Once they got rid of handles and just put a spin button, you can keep your hand on the button and just do. And it basically doubled the rate of gambling. So people went from playing, I think, 400 to 500 games in an hour up to an average of 900. So that's more, if you break that down by minute, it's more than we blink.
Interesting.
Yeah. With a crazy range of outcomes too.
Why can't it? So if snacking is a new, sort of relatively new invention in modern society, and it's correlated to the rise in obesity, can we not just measure the amount of calories that we have? Like, can we not just do the whole calories in, calories out approach to staying fit and healthy?
Oh, I think you absolutely could, but the question is, are people going to actually do that? I mean, I think there's a certain there's a portion of the population that will do that. And, I do believe that if you were to measure everything perfectly, you have, you could probably lose weight eating McDonald's. And there's people who have shown this. At the same time, if you are eating only McDonald's, I can tell you something. You are going to be starving throughout the day, because foods that are ultra processed tend to be less filling per calorie than foods that have just a single ingredient. So I want you to picture you and I have a bag of potato chips, and then we have a plate of boiled potatoes. What do you think we could have more calories of?
Aren't they the same thing? They're both made of potato.
The fried potatoes, right?
Right. Really?
The chips. So if you you could probably eat an entire bag of chips if you really set your mind to it.
Oh yeah.
But you couldn't eat an equivalent amount of calories in boiled potatoes. I mean, you would get full like a quarter of the way through. So for example, like an ounce of boiled potatoes might have 50 to 100 calories. An ounce of chips might have 200, whatever it is. And by the way, it's also not as filling because there's not as much water content. So when you process a food, you concentrate the calories, and people tend to eat more of the food.
I don't eat them anymore, but they used to be one of my favorite foods. And in your first book, I think you came for them, which is croissants. But I don't have those anymore because they make you feel like shit and my gut hates them. But you use a croissant as an example of a food that makes us less full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's this really interesting study out of Australia where they had people eat a certain amount of different types of foods, and then they had them go eat at a buffet a certain amount of time later and measured how much they ate after, and asked them how full they were after eating the test food. So they found that the most filling food per calorie was plain boiled potatoes. I think after that was just plain white fish that was a relatively low fat fish. And then after that, I think it was oatmeal, just plain oatmeal. And the least filling foods tended to be things like croissants, cookies, foods like that. Foods that have been, we're mixing flour, fat, all these sorts of things and baking it. And it's like this nice crispy thing. So it's really it's a measurement of how processed a food is, basically.
A small croissant and white potato both have about 170 calories, but you'd have to eat 7 croissants before you feel the same amount of fullness as one potato. How much of weight gain is about the feeling of fullness? Because it's not really a concept that I really thought much about, this idea of fullness. I thought the key thing was calories or not eating junk food, but fullness.
Well, I think that you will be fuller, or you will be as full, eating fewer, end up eating fewer calories if the food is not as processed. So the foods they take up more room in your stomach. They're not packing in as much calories per bite. Let's say for you to be full, you have to eat 10 ounces of food. And we have one food that has 50 calories per ounce and one food that has 100 calories per ounce. Right. So if you were to eat the 10 ounces of this food, you're going to eat 500 calories. But if you eat 10 ounces of this food, you're going to eat 1,000. And I think that you extrapolate that across the day and you start to see, oh, okay, I can see why choosing foods that help me be more full on fewer calories could be good if my goal was to lose weight or not gain weight compared to foods that are more calorie dense.